Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker, along with my co-host Jen Schwanke. And before we jump into today's conversation, which will be an interview between Jen and Nate Levenson, so hold on for that amazing conversation. We wanted to answer a quick listener question. Jen, how can I exercise my voice as a guardian without coming off as challenging? And I have to say that I gathered this question in a training I did where I talked about a book by Jeremy Kubicek and Steve Cochran called The Five Voices. One of those voices is the voice of a guardian, which means every one of you has someone on your team who pushes back or asks hard questions or cares about budgets or cares about time. And sometimes they can seem like wet blanket, but sometimes they can be trying to protect you. So this person, as an exit ticket, asks this question: how can I exercise my voice as a guardian without coming off as challenging? So what would you say to that kind of leader, Jen?
I would say this leader has been called a challenging before, and it was hurtful. Um, this person, somebody said, "You come off as challenging," and that person is still carrying that as an insult. I wonder what would happen if this person flipped flipped the insult to either a truth or a compliment. So I'm wondering if someone calls me challenging, I'm wondering if I can say, okay, I am challenging. I'm challenging what we're doing here. But maybe I need to do it in a way that doesn't repel people and doesn't make them name call me in an insulting way. So it's okay to challenge, right? It's okay to ask questions and to say, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Ironically, Will, just yesterday, I was talking with a group of fifth graders about leadership. And one of their questions was, how can you make people do things that you want them to do? And I said, well, you can't. And they looked at me, right? Because they're in this leadership group and they're supposed to be learning how to be leaders. And I said, you can never make anybody do something that they don't want to do unless they're a child and you can say, brush your teeth and go to bed. But mostly with peers, you can't. And so you don't want your challenging, or I find it very intriguing the use of the word guardian here, because guardian does imply a hierarchy or tiers of power. And so I would challenge anyone who's grappling with this question to do some reading about power structures and what power structure are you sitting in? Where is your real power? Is it through your leadership or is it through your title? And those are very, very, very different things. And
Mm,
finding that answer might be the place where that insult of your challenging really is and how the growth can occur.
that's so wise. When I think about the different descriptors, because when you, in this book in particular, there's the authors use descriptors like pioneers, people that are trailblazers, or connectors, people that just love to build relationships among people, or nurturers, people that care deeply about the harmony of a team, guardians, which we're describing now, um, the creatives, people that are just like always thinking innovatively and new ideas. Um, when I think about those different categories, um, I think educators have to wear all of those kinds of hats, depending on what you're doing. So there are times when you're right, Jen, when you put that guardian hat on, which in the context of this book is the person who's willing to kind of hold up their hand and go, I'm not sure if this is a good idea, or I'm not sure if we're heading the right direction. How do you do that in a way that engenders confidence and strength and not people thinking you're an energy vampire? Um, and you're right, I had to bring it back to the classroom because I remember when I was a high school language arts teacher and I had ninth graders, I would every day when they came in, I would say, man, I'm so glad you're here today. Thanks for being here. And it would only take a couple of days because freshmen don't ever want to like be noticed. So, but after they would get comfortable about a week or so, and somebody would raise their hand and they would say, why do you say every day that you're glad we're here? We've got to be here. And I would say, well, let me give you the reason why. I said, we have a compulsory education law, which by law requires your parents to have you in school someplace. But I mean, face it, there's like 1,000 of you versus us. If you chose not to learn, if you guys all got up and wanted to leave, I couldn't stop you. And so, I mean, obviously there may be consequences, but I'm just really glad that you chose to step in here today, sit in this seat, and open up and have an opportunity to learn. Now, Jen, I'm guiding them into learning. I'm going to be a guardian in that moment because I'm not going to just let them free for all, or I'm not just going to be Mr. Nice Guy the whole class. I have a whole reason I'm there. I have content ready. I'm going to push them into learning. But like you said, then the power structures, being a guardian is a whole lot more easier. It's a whole lot easier to be a guardian if the other person has the power to be able to make a difference in their own engagement. So I don't know, I'm getting really philosophical, but that's my
Well,
thought.
no, it's true. And I think somebody has called this person challenging. We've all been called that, right? We've
Yeah.
all been called names that can be viewed as a positive or a negative. And so I think the secret to it is, okay, why did this description of me bother me? Why do I want to eradicate it? And is there just a different way that I can be that, but it's a positive?
I'll end this circle with the story. One day, a young man came into my classroom. I'm thinking about one of those first years when I would have those conversations with kids, and he was there early in the morning before other kids, and he just came up and um, no, actually, he was in my first hour class, and I would say that to him every day when he came in. But several years later, I ran into him as an adult, and he came up to me and he said, "Hey, Mr. Parker, you may not remember me, but of course, every kid says that." And he said, "But I don't know if you remember, but you used to say every morning when we came to class, 'I'm so glad you're here.'" And he said, "What you don't know is I was going through a really hard time my freshman year. My parents were fighting all the time. One night, I was so upset with what was going on at home. I just spent the night outside. I just slept outside. And when I came into your class, I hadn't even showered or anything. And you're the first person that saw me that day. And you'll never know the difference it made to hear someone say, 'I'm glad you're here.'"
Right.
So being a guardian is a whole lot easier when you're willing to touch the hearts of the people that you're working with, not just their heads, because it matters.
Exactly. Exactly. So listen, listeners, I'm so excited about the interview today. Okay, you all need to know too, when I do an interview on my own, I always, without fail, email Emily and Will and say, "You guys, this is great. This is the best. This is so good." But I really, really mean it this time. Nate Levenson is one of my favorite people in the world. So smart and doing such brilliant work. So stay tuned for the interview with Nate Levenson.
Principal Matters Podcast, episode 421.
Welcome back, Principal Matters podcast listeners. Today is going to be such a treat. I have with me Nate Levenson, who is the leader of New Solutions K-12. And if you've not heard of New Solutions K-12, you're about to be challenged intellectually, budgetarily, with the systems that you have in place, because this man, I've worked on several projects with him, and I learn something every single time. So welcome to the podcast, Nate.
Great to be here.
And I just want to tell our listeners a little bit about you. And this is just from the bio that I have pulled from your website, which is newsolutionsk12.com. And so here's what we have coming out of your speakers today, folks. We have someone who brings such a unique perspective to the missions of supporting schools, improving the lives and outcomes for students. Gosh, Nate, you've consulted in hundreds of districts in many states. You've advised governors, state legislators, state commissioners, the Secretary of Education. You've been published in over 30 articles. You've written 6 books, lots of white papers for think tanks. And so all of that is clearly to intimidate our podcast listeners a little bit, but it's meant to set the stage for what we're going to talk about. So now it's your turn. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and not only where you started, but how you ended up leading such important work today.
Sure. And I appreciate the background you shared, but I think the most important thing to keep in mind is I've been a school superintendent. I've also been on a school board for 6 years, so those two sides of me are always in conflict.
Right.
And having done the work and walked the walk, I think the nicest thing people say about me is that I'm very, very practical.
Right.
Maybe bold, but definitely practical.
Right.
And I started my professional life in the private sector. Ran an engineering and manufacturing firm for more than a decade, but always loved public education. decided to join a school board. And, I'd go home after most of those meetings and think to myself, I could do that job that the superintendent does. And if I'm being honest, thought I could do it better than him. So ultimately decided to become a superintendent.
And so that is true, that it's such a unique skill set and set of experiences that you bring. And I say that because I think there's a lot of people around walking around the world saying, I could do that better, but very few do it and very few sit in the seat. And so I know I've had many conversations with you where I will say, well, Nate, here's what I know after 26 years doing this. And you'll say, well, Jen, that's not actually true. Here's another perspective. And so I think that everything that you've done and the fact that you've walked the walk and you learned it really make you a credible consultant for many districts. And part of that too, you and I have talked at length about the needs, the mindsets, and the strategies that we have in place in education. And then we have this other huge elephant in the room, and that's tight finances. And that's the work that we've done together. So break that down for us. The mindsets and strategies we're using, the need to improve outcomes, and tight budgets.
Yeah, so obviously everybody gets into education, myself included, because you care about kids. And we want to have more and better outcomes for students. That's why we get up in the morning, and that's good. That's the right thing. But somewhere along the way, we got it into our heads that if we want to help kids achieve at higher levels, offer more services to kids like mental health services or behavioral support services or extracurriculars or new electives, if we want to do more and better, somehow we got two ideas in our mind. The first was it's going to take more money. I mean, let's face it, you're going to need reading teachers and electives teachers and school psychologists or mental health folks, so you're going to need more money to do that. And the other thing is we've also gotten in our mind that somehow smaller class sizes are better. We've also gotten in our mind that smaller intervention groups are better. And the issue here is needing more money, which certainly makes life easier, might not always be possible. And smaller class sizes and smaller intervention groups are simply incredibly expensive. And for both those thinking, it says that in flush times, those will be the growth times. Those will be the times where we can make things better. But obviously, and I do say obviously in air quotes, when we're reducing staff and having to increase class size, obviously we are not going to make things better during that window. And that's just not true. And having had the benefit of, certainly as a superintendent, while our budgets are being cut, we closed the general ed special ed achievement gap by 40 points in our high school. We reduced the number of struggling readers by 2/3. And yes, I did add 14 reading teachers, but it meant I had to cut 16 other positions to add the 14 reading teachers. And yes, we did add like half a kid to every elementary classroom, but that allowed me to hire instructional coaches to help the teachers we had become more effective teachers. But I think the first biggest mindset, and I think very relevant for where we are at this moment in time, I believe the next 5 years will be very tight fiscal budgets. And I worry that a lot of school and system leaders are thinking, obviously, again in air quotes, things are not going to get better. But our kids can't wait 5 years. We need to make them better, and there are enough examples out there of how we can do better for our kids, even while budgets are tight.
So that's exactly the question that I know our listeners are going to be asking. They're going to say, okay, yeah, Nate, the budgets are going to be tight. It's going to be a tough 5 years. And you have talked many times about the tendency of leaders to lower their expectations when money is tight. So let's just expect less. That will certainly, make me feel better at night when I'm getting lesser outcomes, but I'm saving money. So why is it that we assume things will be worse when money is tight? And maybe give us an example or two of the times you've seen the actual opposite happen.
So again, I think the reason the expectations drop is school leaders and district leaders do not get to determine how much money they're going to spend. I mean, we all spend every dollar we have.
Yes.
It's just a fact, and that's a good thing. But with ESSER funds going away, with the cost of health insurance going up, with the cost of everything going up, our budgets are going to be tight. We will not be able to afford, and I have no solution to this, we will not be able to afford every person and every service we had 2 years ago, 2 years from now. So it is a fact that we will have less people and less services. Unfortunate, but just true. So either we will do less stuff for kids, or we will do that stuff differently and maybe even more and better, but with less people. So let me give you 2 examples. I was working with the district just last week. They're looking at their budget. The school year is just about to start. And they know they have 4 fewer reading teachers. Therefore, obviously, fewer kids are going to get reading help. Their very strong Tier 2 reading program is being, quote, gutted because they don't have the staff, and they're going to ration services, and not every kid who needs reading help is going to get it. So it's not crazy to be thinking our reading scores are probably not going up because a bunch of kids aren't going to be served who we know need to be served. That's what I'll call the traditional path. Inherent in that thinking I agree with, is that reading teachers are really precious. They are worth their weight in gold. And if we have fewer of them, bad things happen. But what if we actually said to ourselves, reading teachers are worth their weight in gold, therefore their time is precious, and we're going to manage their time very differently. Now, it turns out, based on a lot of research we have done, the average reading teacher in America today runs about 5 reading groups a day with about 3 kids in it. 5 groups a day, 3 kids in a group, that's 15 kids. Now, one really interesting fact is that I knew that fact, and almost no superintendent or principal I have worked with knows that fact. They all know how many kids are in a 1st grade classroom. They all know how many periods a high school math teacher teaches. But ask a leader how many reading groups and how many kids are in it, they don't know.
It's true.
So I just told you, it's 5 groups and it's 3 kids. Now, ask those same people after you've told them that, is that okay? And the most common answer is, I'm not sure, but it seems okay to me. It's not okay, folks. Particularly in a world where we have lots of, 2 out of 3 kids in America don't read on grade level. 5 groups a day. These groups are 30 minutes long. That is 2.5 hours in a 6.5 or 7-hour day. These people are precious. They are so impactful. The classroom teacher teaches 6 hours a day. The high school teacher who's got 5 periods, those are 52-minute periods, not 30-minute periods. So we have worked with districts, and districts have said, whoa, if we think about it that way, 5 periods does not look good. 8 seems like a lot, but that's only 4 hours. The classroom teacher is doing a lot more than that. And so all of a sudden, people are moving from 5 groups to 8 groups or 9 groups. And then let's go to the other dimension. 3 kids in a group? Yeah, we love small groups. But the research, all of the research says groups of 5 or 6 for reading intervention are fine. And in fact, better, 6 kids in a group, all of there for the exact same reason, phonics, for example, or fluency. Much more instruction and much more gains than just 3 kids, but there for 3 different reasons, phonics, fluency, comprehension. So you can go from 8 groups, put 5 kids in a group, that's 40 kids you're helping with a single reading teacher. Go to 9 groups and 6 kids in a group, now we're over 50. We're going from 15 to 50. We can lose 4 reading teachers and still help more kids and help them more.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but how do you actually get the right insights and know the best next steps? The secret is IXL. IXL helps you easily assess performance and determines the best path forward for each student. Whether you need data for benchmarking or intervention planning, IXL can do it all. And IXL doesn't stop at assessments. It also provides you with everything else your school needs, from a standards-aligned K-12 curriculum to actionable analytics. IXL's online learning and teaching platform is research proven to improve student outcomes and is used by 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. If you also want to start driving real progress, get started today at ixl.com/PM. Support for Principal Matters comes from EduSkills. Let's face it, many schools are trying to support their Title III and multilingual programs on their own. And if that's you, it's time to take your support to the next level with EduSkills. EduSkills is designed by former educators as a go-to platform for support for K-12 multilingual programs. They understand the value of multilingual students, and they give educators the tools that they need to help all students succeed. From improving language acquisition to boosting family engagement, EduSkills offers cutting-edge tech and services for districts of all sizes. With easy setup and ongoing support, they'll make sure your transition is smooth and effective and that more students are receiving better services. Ready to get started? Visit eduskillsllc.com or call 405-879-9898 to schedule a demo. EduSkills, breaking barriers and building bridges for multilingual education.
So here's what a principal or a superintendent would push back. They would say, yeah, but it's going to be really hard, or people are going to be really angry. They're going to be very upset. And you have said to me before, it's not about cutting help for kids. We can't say that because that's not what we're doing. So how did you respond as a superintendent, or how do you help principals and superintendents respond when they say, I'm going to use your word, you're gutting our most vulnerable programs?
So I think if we can start, so the way we tend to think about budgets is our budgets list the line items and the FTE. And so yes, in this example, we're going from like 10 to 7. We lost 3 reading teachers. That's a negative. That's why it feels like we're gutting. But imagine if our budget actually said not just the FTE, but the number of groups and the number of kids in the group. And then had a column that showed how many kids we're helping. And if you're going to go from helping 200 kids to helping 250 kids, nobody feels like you are gutting a program. They feel like you're expanding the program. We just happen to be spending less money to do it.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say 2 important things here. One is principals, superintendents know how many kids your reading teachers, your specialists are seeing, know that, and then share it. Be more transparent with it. Fair?
Dana, yes, but I literally mean put it in your budget document.
I see.
Like that is what you are spending your money on. So like we would actually put into budget documents, it would say 7 reading teachers, parentheses, 9 groups a day, 5 kids on average to a group. That is what we funded, not a reading teacher. Because I wouldn't pay that money for a reading teacher that was only going to help 15 kids if I were a taxpayer, but I'd be much more comfortable if it was helping 45 kids.
Right, exactly. And I assume this same thinking applies for students who are gifted, students who are learning English as a second language, students with special needs. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, but also instructional coaches and the whole mental health piece. And there's an incredible parallel because we are going to have a hard time maintaining, say, like all the social workers and mental health providers, because so many of those roles were funded by ESSER. But in the same way, if you go and ask the director of mental health or whoever is overseeing these folks, how many kids do they help in a day? How many groups do they have? How many kids are in a group, or is it all one-on-one? And we have seen, when we take a hard look at how these mental health folks use their time, you can often double, triple, quadruple the number of kids they can help. Now, really important point to make, I am not criticizing reading teachers or mental health professionals. If I'm criticizing anybody, and I guess I am, it is the principals and superintendents and department leaders who have simply not set guidelines, have not looked at their schedules. We're undermanaging people who are really valuable.
Well, and I'll take that because as a principal, I was the exact person you are describing. My reading teachers were in their rooms doing magical things, but I didn't know how many kids. I didn't know how quickly they were turning over. I knew there was a little bit of discrepancy between workloads, but that was from the perception I received from general education teachers, right? I'm going to admit it. I never said, hey, show me your schedule, show me your kids, show me the flow of your day. And so I think that criticism in many cases, or at least in mine, is well founded.
And to be really fair about this, not only am I not blaming the staff, but the staff actually will thank you. So this is a story that is less than a week old. I gave a presentation similar to this about a month ago, and there was a principal in the room who did not seem that interested, actually had a frown on her face through much of the session. And I saw her again last week, and she said, I was kind of annoyed with everything you had to say. I get that a lot. But so I went and asked my social worker for her schedule because, school was starting up in a couple of weeks. I knew she was in working on her schedule, and I looked at it and my jaw dropped, she said, but you're only with kids like 2 hours a day. She goes, yeah, it's terrible, but I have to go to these RTI meetings and these IEP meetings and this meeting, and I got invited to the cluster meeting for each grade level in the school, so that's 6 extra meetings. She goes, yeah, I just have a couple hours at the end of the day to be with kids. And the principal said, okay, what if we reversed it? You must be with kids for the whole day except for 2 hours. And she said, one, I would thank you for that, but that's not possible. I couldn't go to all these meetings. And she said, exactly, that's what I want you to do. And literally in that afternoon, she her schedule, quadrupled the number of kids she was seeing, and told other people, like, hey, I can come to your cluster meeting once every 3 weeks, but I can't come every week to every cluster meeting and every meeting I've been asked to come to. And she is so much happier because she did not become a social worker to go to meetings. She became a social worker to work with kids.
Well, and I think that opens up a whole other conversation about how we spend, waste, squander our time. And I think it's very interesting. We use those words in relation to time, but yet we do it all the time in education. And I remember during COVID when we flipped many IEP meetings to virtual, and all of a sudden they shrank from 2 hours to 30 minutes because nobody necessarily wants to sit on a Zoom for 2 hours. But if you're in a conference room and you're with these people who love your kid and everybody brought coffee and you just study the problem, but there's not that efficiency of time. And so I can see how that principle, by making that brave step of saying, let's flip this, made a lot of lives better.
Yep.
What about equity, Nate? You talk about equity, and that's a very shiny word right now. Tell me how that plays into your work, because I'm sure that comes up.
Absolutely. So let's first of all define equity and define what it's not. So in my working definition, equity is that kids in schools who need more get more. So what that means it's not is that everybody gets the exact same amount. And while the word equity can possibly be, it is kind of a little more controversial today. So the concept that kids who need more get more is not controversial, except if you look at the budgets and the way we allocate staff. Here's the perfect example of not equitable, of not fair. That is one social worker per school. Anytime you see the one per school rule, or the half per school rule, that is like a screaming not fair. But the weird part is so many principals believe that is the pinnacle of fairness. Like you did not play favorites, therefore you were fair. We each got one. But imagine, so as I was a superintendent, I had schools that ranged from 200 kids to 450 kids. They each got one reading teacher because I was told there was nothing more fair. I could think of nothing less fair. Now, mind you, some of those schools were 60% or 50% free and reduced lunch, and others were 50% McMansions. And so the number of kids who struggled to read could be 4 times as many in one school versus another, but they each got one reading teacher in the name of fairness. So what we did is we said, hey, we do benchmark assessments, we assess everything. We knew to the student how many kids scored below benchmark in every school in every grade. So we just started assigning reading teachers based on, like, you got 1.73 reading teachers because that was your proportion. And then to really push this, we said we give the benchmarks 3 times a year. So after we gave them a second time, we looked at the data and said, whoa, congratulations, John F. Kennedy School. You have cut the number of struggling readers by half. And like, whoa, we have a real problem at the other school because they're up. So we transferred reading teachers mid-year because one school had far fewer kids to serve. And that seemed fair to me. I wasn't punishing them. They did not have the kids who needed the service anymore, and another school did. So it is really driving in a mathematical way staffing and supports based on the kids who need it.
Okay, so I'm a principal, I'm driving to work and I'm listening to you say this and I'm scared because I'm thinking, but I can't do this. Our district has always, since the earth cooled, had one reading teacher per school. I would, if I said this, or even broached this as a topic, people would revolt. And so now I'm shifting away from that scenario to me, Nate. And I remember you have said to me before, you have to really know this, believe it, and understand it. You can't just call Nate Levenson, have him look at the numbers, make a recommendation, and then stand in front of my staff and say, well, Nate said so. This is why we're doing it. Nate said so is not a good answer. Tell us about districts who are able to implement these really difficult changes. And I guess I'm asking you about courage, because having the courage to do it, own it, not blame someone else, and then get to the other side where people are thanking you because more kids are benefiting.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, but I don't think it takes as much courage as it does what I'll call a reframing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say we each get one per school, the focus, the noun in this is the school. That's a very adult thing. But what if I told you, and we shifted the whole conversation to kids, and if I told you that in one of these schools, that if I scored at a certain level on the benchmark, I had a 0% chance of getting reading help in one school because there were so many of us who needed the help. And then in this other school, I had a 100% chance. I'm the same kid with the exact same reading scores. But which school I went to determined entirely whether I got reading help or not.
Mm-hmm.
I find you don't need courage, you just needed awareness.
Right.
Very few teachers and very few principals say, yes, that's the person I want to be. I want to know that where you live is the single biggest determiner of whether you get reading help in this district or not. And if you happen to live in the wrong side of town, south of the tracks, 3 out of 4 kids who need the help don't get it. That is not who we are. That is not who goes into public education. But that is not what people hear when you say we each get one per school.
Right. So you have to know those numbers, and you have to really study them and understand that comparing a child's experience is actually worth the time.
Yep. And you really have to keep the focus on the student and the student experience. And I have found that people will do the right thing when it is presented that way. I feel that they didn't know the implication of their one per school staffing.
Right. Right. And in your work, I'm sure you've seen many light bulbs go off when a district calls you and said, "Listen, we're in trouble. Come in, take a look." And when you point out these things, it's kind of like, opening a closet and saying, "Look, there's a whole bunch of clothes in here." And everybody's shocked and amazed, like, "What? I had no idea the door was closed." I imagine that it feels very new to look at these problems in a mathematical and systematic way, because in many schools, I would imagine, it's just been this way. We just do it this way.
Yeah, history has not been our help.
Mhm.
Uh, it just, I think in so many ways we've got used to how things work. And if you do it long enough, it seems both reasonable and fair. But it's generally not reasonable and not fair. And as dollars are getting tighter, that's the best time to take a step back
Right.
and challenge past practice.
Do you hear people say, let me reframe that question. I hear many principals when I go out and I consult in districts, I hear a lot of, "I'm so busy, I'm so stressed, I can't think about that. The discipline's bad, the parents are bad." And so this is really about time management, right? Where you put your energy, where you put your stress, where you put your time. So if someone calls you and says, "I need help, but I don't have time to actually implement anything," what's your response to that?
Sure. They hate the response at first because one of the things we haven't talked about, like, I gave examples of moving reading teachers during the year, or moving away from the one per school system, or getting 4 times as much mental health services by looking at schedules. Central office, and I say this as a former assistant superintendent and superintendent, central offices cannot do this without active engagement and support from principals. So one of the biggest mistakes school systems make is when they try to use their money well. The most common approach is small group of very smart people in the central office hunkered down for days, weeks, months. And because they know how busy principals are, I hear this all the time, we cannot take principals out of their building, we need to respect their time, and so we're going to do this work, we're going to crunch these numbers, and after 3 months of doing it, we will call the principals in for a 2-hour meeting. We will spend the first 3 minutes of that meeting apologizing for bringing the principals to the meeting. Then we will tell them what we did, and the principals will hate it. Usually they'll keep that to themselves. Superintendent in central office goes off thinking, yep, they're okay with it. And then the principals badmouth it in private to their teachers, to the school board, and then it dies at the school board or in the public domain, and nothing changes. Every school system I've ever seen implement thoughtful budgets, the principals are part of the budget design, part of the decision making from the beginning. And yes, as a superintendent, I pulled my principals out of their schools for 4 hours every 2 weeks for the entire year to plan and lead the district as a team. And the only thing I apologized to them for was that it didn't happen before. We cannot run a school system without principals. You can maintain the status quo without principal support. You cannot improve and change how you do things without them, and they will never support you if they're not at the table. And quite honestly, central office always seems to get the details wrong, and I put myself in that category. The principal voice says, whoa, folks, you didn't think about X, Y, and Z. And you go, damn, we didn't. Thank God you were here.
Right.
We need principals, and we need their time, and we should not apologize for giving them meaningful voice in how a district is run and how budgets are built.
Well, and having been a principal whose voice, wasn't heard for many years, there is nothing more frustrating. You get so angry, you get so bitter, you feel so disrespected. And you feel like middle management, like a cog in the wheel, but you think, well, I know a little something. I know a thing or two. I could help. And so to be brought out and to say, "Hey, I want to hear what you have to say," not only builds trust, but there's such a plethora of information there that
Totally.
we'd be irresponsible to not tap into.
We need their wisdom. One last piece I do want to add about
Please.
principals at the table. We need them there, and they generally appreciate being there, but there is one big transition they have to make. They are not there to be advocates for their school and to protect turf and to say my teachers matter more than your teachers. They are there to help manage the entire district. And I will tell you that to pull this off, when I was superintendent, first I handed out 750 copies of the 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Right.
Then we brought actually in a consultant to work on teamwork, because I needed elementary principals thinking the high school is as important. They're my kids just grown up. I needed the high school principal thinking, whoa, if the kids don't learn to read in elementary, we're not going to get them into AP classes in the high school. And I will admit, the first few times we had principals at the table, the discussions were worse, not better, because people were protecting turf. As they started to believe that they were managers of the district, not just of a building, and in the 5 dysfunctions of a team, where your first team was the district, not your school, they were brilliant, and brilliant things happened. But that is a mind shift.
It is a mind shift. Yeah, I've been in many principal meetings or worked with districts where the principals come in and they're going to fight for their building because they want to go back after the meeting and say, I got you. I fought hard. We're in good shape. And it's such a self-preservation. And I don't mean the individual principal there. I mean, preserving my school exactly how it is today. And so there's 2 mindset shifts, really. I'm a manager of the district, and also I believe change will be better.
Yep.
Yep. Well, Nate, this is, once again, I tell you, every time I talk to you, I get smarter, and this is no exception. And today, I think you made a lot of other people smarter. So here's my question. How can listeners get in touch with you? I'm sure there's going to be some district leaders who want to know more.
Yeah, definitely happy to talk to anybody and everybody about these topics. newsolutionsK12.com, easiest way to get to us. Happy to continue the conversation. You'll also find all my books and articles and white papers and blogs on these topics there as well.
You're a very busy man, and it is true. You're always happy to talk. So thank you so much, Nate Levenson, and everyone go to the Principal Matters podcast webpage, and we will have show notes. We'll have links to find Nate, and all of you, again, hopefully you learned a little something about, maybe not about courage, but about mindsets. Thanks, everyone.
You can find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academy's Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations for my books, as well as for Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.